Hello, dear ones, and welcome to Mindful Compassion Hour, our compassionate relationship with suffering series in partnership between the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation and Engaging Mindfulness Forging Meaning. This is a 6-session series, and we just want to say welcome. The mission of the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation is to establish optimal quality of life for the Northwest Parkinson's community through awareness, education, advocacy, and care. My name is Barcha Wachtel, and I'm a licensed independent clinical social worker, mental health professional, and a mindful self-compassion trained teacher through the Center for MSC at University of California, San Diego's Medical Center, a program run there through Kristen Neff, a professor out of University of Texas, Austin, and her colleague, Chris Germer, who's the head of the psychology department at Harvard Medical School. My private practice is Engaging Mindfulness Forging Meaning, or just EMFM for short. You can find out more about my mindfulness practice and education programs through www.emfm.space. The mission of EMFM is to engage people of diverse identities and abilities in cultivating wise attention, deep meaning, and fiercely compassionate ways of being as the foundations for transformation, interconnection, and well-being. As we said before, Compassionate Relationship with Suffering series is a 6-session series. It's meant to provide education and support for people living with chronic conditions as well as their caregivers in the basic practices of compassion, both how we relate to ourselves and the way that we relate to others out of our experiences of suffering and difficulty. The practices that I'm sharing with you are based in psychological neuroscience and Buddhist psychology, the research, as well as the history that's connected with these practices. And we're just learning how to respond to difficulty with kindness, understanding, and love. And these practices are correlated with physical and emotional well-being outcomes. You can find out more about online programs through the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation by going to www.nwpf.org. These, all their presentations are available for free, and they're archived so that you can access them at any time, even if you miss some of the live broadcasts. So EMFM provides support and education for those impacted by ongoing mental and physical health challenges in personal, social, and professional life through professionally facilitated educational seminars. Although the information and support provided can be psychoeducational in nature, these seminars are not counseling, nor are they therapy groups. And EMFM is not providing healthcare services. You should not use the information contained herein for diagnosing or treating any mental or physical health condition. Participation in EMFM Northwest Parkinson's Foundation seminars do not create a mental health provider-patient relationship. We recommend that you always consult with a medical and/or mental health professional for medical or mental health advice or information about diagnosis and treatment. By viewing and engaging this seminar, you acknowledge and agree that if you feel uncomfortable in any way, shape, or form, that you have the right and responsibility to take good care of yourself by disengaging from the seminar or any practice at any time. So always at the beginning of my presentations, I like to give some disclosures of organizations that I have connections with. And so that's just to make sure that I'm being very much above the board. And any of the information that I'm presenting is solely my responsibility. And so none of the above organizations, including the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation, are responsible for the information. That's solely up to me and EMFM. So what are we here for? So always, this is the review that we do every session that's really important. So repetition is a part of practice. It helps us to form habits. It's there to support us when we need to move in a particular direction so that we're not caught up in constant reactivity and being at the whim of those. So we get to be more intentional about what's important to us. And then we just practice over time. And we'll get into more of the detail around that, just kind of building the information from session to session. So the first thing is practice. So what we're practicing is, again, that Pali word bhavana, from the originating language of the Buddhist psychology, which just means the cultivation of awareness. So bhavana, the word that we use for mindfulness that's in the original text, means cultivation. It's like we're planting seeds over time. And those seeds then grow into this kind of full awareness, our connection with our mind and body, as well as our sense of well-being and our connection with ourselves and with others in the way that we're relating. The other thing that we're doing is, within that cultivation, is we're cultivating our core values. So for you, that may mean, if you're a religious person, cultivating the values within your religion. That may be cultivating the values within your spirituality. Or if you are a person who is more secular, then that's just cultivating the basic core values that are important to you. So they're not my core values, they're centering in your core values. So there's nothing here for you to accept or reject. We're creating a framework through the contemplative neuroscience or Buddhist psychology for you to practice what's deeply meaningful to you. So we can let go of feeling like I'm trying to proselytize or have someone have a particular kind of belief system, unless you have difficulties with values around love and kindness and generosity and peace and forgiveness. You're not going to have a challenge with the practices that we do in the information. Okay. It's also about practicing what's called beginner's mind. So that means that we show up to experiences and to our practices, and hopefully with ourselves, to recognizing that we can always begin again. And that's actually not selfishness, it's perseverance. So we recognize that making mistakes and failure are a part of the learning process. And the only way that we move into anything that is meaningful in our life is through practice and staying connected with that sense of perseverance. So just because we can't do our expected thing that we feel like we should be able to do at the beginning, or other people's expectations of us, that doesn't make us a total failure. That just means that we're still learning how to do what we need to do. So you can let go of being the expert. It's kind of like getting on a bike for the very first time a child learns. We don't expect them to have their balance down and know exactly what they're doing. We give them time to have guidance and training wheels, and sometimes just learning how to balance with your feet on the ground. So all of that, we just get to be a beginner and go back to the beginning if we do anything that even feels like it's a mistake. The other thing is allowing this experience of balanced awareness in this moment. So it's not about making something happen in the future. So that doesn't mean we don't show up because we want to alleviate our suffering, and we'll get more into that. But it's about allowing ourselves to be with the present moment and then notice what happens in that moment. So some people will get a lot of expectation that they have to empty their mind, or that they have to be still, or that they're going to see bright lights or have euphoric experiences or see spiritual figures or those kind of things. And again, it's not that that doesn't ever happen, but it just means that that's not the purpose of what we're doing. We're learning how to be with the experience in the moment. The other thing is just testing it out to see if that practice of being with the moment shows up in some benefits for our health and well-being and our relationship to ourselves and others. So we get to be our own best scientists, testing things out for just ourselves and seeing what shows up in truth. So to solidify the particulars of this particular series is, again, asking the question, what are we here for? So we're practicing compassion not to make our suffering go away. So, right, that's that kind of being in that state of allowing for what's happening in the moment. So we practice compassion not to make our suffering go away, but because we are suffering, right? It's like a little kid who has some illness, that we may do the best that we can to alleviate that suffering, but we're not going to make the illness go away just because we want it to. We're going to try to be with it in as nurturing of ways as we can to comfort that emotion, um, and the emotional reactions that go along with not feeling good. Right. So Chris Germer, one of my teachers that I mentioned earlier, always says and is quoted as saying, mindfulness is a special relationship with suffering. And so that's the focus of this particular series, is that relationship and what we want that relationship to look like. Do we want it to be reactive, or do we want it to be purposeful, intentional, and centered in our values? And again, that takes practice. So we're not here to shame anyone into you should. It takes time, it takes patience, and it's okay if now is not the time. So just allowing yourself to be gentle with your experience even now. So three kinds of reactions often show up when we introduce compassion. And these are generally can be strong emotions is what we're mainly looking out for. Pleasant and neutral sensations are not as much of a concern, but just like the disclosure at the beginning, if overwhelming unpleasant experiences show up, or emotion states, anger, tears, anxiety, when they get overwhelming, we call this backdraft. And that actually means that we're facing something that has been hidden, something that we've been fighting, or something that we've been running away for a very long time. And when we face it, there can be this big explosion of emotion. So ultimately, it's not a bad thing. It's just I would want you to see a therapist if that were to happen, or to happen on an ongoing basis. So I often encourage people who have a lot of trauma in their background, go see a therapist, get some work done in talking through some things so you can get used to those unpleasant emotions, and then coming back to practice. And we always try to practice in a lighter way. So on a 10 scale, 0 being no stress reaction in the body at all, 10 being the hardest thing you've ever faced, we want you to practice in the way that you're relating to experiences and maybe things that you're thinking about as you're practicing in more the 3 to 4, maybe 5 range. So I want you to keep it low. So again, it often means that people are experiencing progress when they have these big explosions of emotion. The second, third, 10th, 20th time that they come up against that experience, it decreases over time. So we get used to it, and that's part of the power of mindfulness. But I don't want you tackling the big things right now. We have these experiences that are also a little bit tied with how extroverted or introverted we are, of how much we tend to open or close in any given experience. You'll notice with certain friends, family members, strangers, people who you don't feel comfortable around, the more uncomfortable we are, the more we tend to kind of close off. So physically, we may actually do this of kind of like, I'm very guarded and I don't trust you, or I'm skeptical. And that's okay for you to relate to me or to the webinar or the practices in this way. So it's okay to be a skeptic. It's okay to not feel comfortable. So sometimes we might close off a little bit because we're not in a space where we feel like we can trust what's going on, and that's okay. The other thing is that sometimes we show up like this, where it's like, yes, this is the thing I've been looking for. I'm so ready for this. And so we naturally open to it. And what I often encourage people to do is kind of monitor how open or closed you need to be in order to be with the practices and take good care of yourself. Okay, so always finding that balance in what's helpful for you. So the immediate practices that we're going to review every time, and then I'm adding one extra one today so that you can experience that, is immediate self-care or self-compassion practices are just kind of checking in with this question of, what is it that my body or my emotions need in this moment? All right, so you can kind of check in with yourself. That could be just a basic value like love or kindness or peace, courage, or just enjoying nature, like creating an image in the mind of you being in the space of nature that is your favorite in the world, or maybe a beach or next to a fire, outside or next to a fireplace, and just feeling what it feels like to be in the presence of that space or that being or that experience, and then noticing how that feels in the body. All right. So just take a moment to connect with something that you feel like maybe you need for today. just like some of the things that I mentioned. And again, this could be an image, a spiritual leader or spiritual figure, a religious figure, or someone who naturally brings joy to your heart. All right. So we're moving away from the practical things like, oh, well, Barcha, I need a bath, or I need a cup of coffee, or a cup of tea, or a blanket. Those are great. But what I'm more interested in us cultivating the things that we don't often, which is this internal lived experiences of what are the resources that I have without having to do something in the world that will help meet my suffering in the moment. Okay. The thing that we've already talked about is leaving. So it's okay when things don't feel safe to you or overwhelming, or people are being really cruel or mean, to just get up and leave. It's okay to do that. So I always want you to honor that within you, disconnection doesn't always mean that you're somehow abandoning human connection. It just means that sometimes in order to take good care of yourself, you have to do that, right? Just to feel emotional or physical safety. All right, the other thing is the practice of the breath. So in the moment, if we start to feel overwhelmed, we can come into the breath, so starting by taking one deep cleansing breath on the in breath, and then nice and slow on the out breath. And just doing this 2 more times at your own pace. Noticing the nourishment of the in-breath and the soothing of the out-breath. Right. And then just noticing how that feels for just a moment. Just to take a few deep breaths, just noticing. All right. And then the other thing that you can do are 2 options. One is just beginning to make connection with the hands together, or just gently touching the tips of the fingers or tapping. You can also tap on a part of the body, or on the forearm. The other is going into the extremities in the feet. So placing awareness in the soles of the feet, if you're seated or even if you're lying down, just wiggling the toes, noticing for a moment the sensations in the toes through the soles of the feet. And back towards the heels. Just feeling the support of the earth. And now again, checking in, noticing how that feels in the body. All right. The other practice is just noticing ambient sounds in the room. So I just want to take a moment to just notice the sounds around you. There may be people outside or cars passing by or someone speaking in the other room. So just notice those sounds as just sounds, and I'll ring the bowl here to kind of support that listening. And again, just noticing what that feels like. Right, so today we're going to talk about gentle vocalization. So part of compassion practices, in particular around self-compassion, are these ways of relating in our internal voice, or the tone that we use with ourselves, that again takes practice. We're generally pretty used to being hard on ourselves. So we're just going to do a couple of sound practices. So first, what I want you to do is, with me, I want you to make the sound ah. Okay, so 3 more times with me, taking an in breath. Ah. And making that sound out loud. I know it feels a little goofy. Ah. And one more time. Ah. Okay. And then just noticing what that feels like. So everywhere in the world, this is the universal sound when anthropologists and social scientists review kind of how we relate in different cultures. This is the universal sound of relaxation. So our mind and our body doesn't know the difference of what comes first, the relaxation or the feeling of relaxation or the sound that we make around that, right? Like getting into a really nice bathtub that's at the temperature that's perfect for us, we might make the sound ah. Right? So if we make the sound ah, we're so used to having that connection between the experience and the sound that when we make the sound, it begins sending the neurotransmitters and the chemistry in the body begins shifting as though we are in that relaxation state. So it's just a nice way to kind of support the body. So the second sound is I want you to kind of tilt your head to the side a little bit, just like you're listening intently to someone that you care about very much. And I want you to, in your mind's eye, imagine you can see a little puppy or a kitten struggling to get up some stairs, just struggling. And I want you to make this sound. Aww. And again, I know this is goofy, so we're just going to make this sound 3 times. In breath, and then aww. Aww. And one more time. Aww. Right? So now noticing in the body what this feels like, right? I'm getting a little bit of a warmth through my heart, a little bit of relaxation in the body. My whole body's kind of warming up a little bit. And if nothing is happening in any of these individual kind of self-care practices, that's okay too. That's one of the things that can happen is we can feel a little disconnected from our body. It doesn't mean you're doing it incorrectly. It just means that we're starting to wake up the practice and in the body of being kind and gentle to ourselves. So allow yourself to work with the practices if you can, and it's okay to be where you are in that experience. All right, so just like last session, we talked about the first rule of mindfulness is, well, the first rule is actually that all beings suffer, that that's a part of our experience. That we don't get out of the living without pain in coming into the world through birth, right? Babies cry. And then throughout life, as we get older, we experience changes in our bodies that are painful or uncomfortable. We all get sick or have a chronic illness like Parkinson's. And we all are going to suffer in death to some degree as we move towards the end of our life. So that's non-negotiable. That just happens. The other first rule of mindfulness is that the mind will wander. And this is kind of a second layer of suffering. So the way that we relate to the non-negotiable suffering in life is then to be very reactive. And so we spend this kind of mind wandering time where we're thinking about other things other than what's happening in the present moment about 46.9% of the time. And I've got the researchers noted there in the slide, Killingsworth and Gilbert in 2010, Reichley, and then another team of researchers, which I need to get them up as well through UC Berkeley, found that this part of the brain projects itself, creates a sense of self first. It then projects this self into the future, into the past, and then it's scanning and looking for problems. And so when we think about problems, we're not very happy. So we're in this kind of unhappy state about 50% of our waking hours that doesn't feel very comfortable. So the antidote to this mind wandering is teaching the mind mindfulness. So it's just awareness. And neuroscience and psychology researchers in mindfulness use the term of how we define mindfulness as paying attention to what's happening while it's happening with acceptance or non-judgment. So we're allowing ourselves, again, to be with that present moment experience, letting go of our expectations about things being different, because the definition of suffering is the wish that things be different than the way that they are. So we're not meaning that every suffering is the same, or that to use the word suffering means that you're experiencing the worst torture or being a refugee or having other more painful experiences in life. It just means that suffering is about discomfort, pain, and more traumatic experiences as well. So suffering defined as the wish that things be different than the way that they are. And that happens to varying degrees with all of those experiences. The second component of mindfulness is also that component of acceptance and non-judgment, that we're not just paying attention, right? I can just pay attention to you and just be like, hi, how are you? Right? Or very fearful of like, hi, it's nice to meet everyone, right? So you can actually feel that when I start to even pretend that I'm disinterested or that I'm fearful. So in mindfulness, despite what might be happening around our disinterest or shut down or being fearful, anxious, or sad, we practice what's called the awareness, of being aware of the emotion state that we're in or state of reactivity. And then we're placing an intention of how we want to relate to what we're paying attention to in our body, in our mind, or the relationships outside of ourselves. So we're paying attention by practice in a particular way, just like right now, hopefully you pick up that I enjoy and value practicing being loving and kind, that's something that's important to me. So I practice being warm and loving, and to a certain degree, that's something that was already a part of me, but it's something that can be cultivated. Benefits of mindfulness, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. We reviewed this a lot more the last two sessions, but just that there are all these improvements that happen in the body for people who take even like an 8-week class in mindfulness. There are also reductions in certain difficulties that happen around stress level and trauma impact and activation of pain in the body. And there's all this regulation of our neurochemistry and biochemistry within our bodies. So just to build on this a little bit more, and we'll tie this up is a lot more in the next session, but the three components of compassion are mindfulness, common humanity, and then kind response. In this slide, we're really talking about self-kindness, so the way that we relate to ourselves. So compassion is only compassion if it has these three components. Mindfulness is empathy of relating and being aware. And then we recognize our common humanity. And then we also practice a sense of kindness towards others or towards ourselves. These are direct antidotes to the suffering of the stress response. So our common reactivity that's designed to just keep us safe, like a default mode network, right? It's constantly looking for problems. It's designed to keep us safe from predators, but we're not very happy. If we're always in a stress response, freezing or running away from everything or fighting our way through life, we're going to be in this constant state of stress. We often turn this inward and we get caught up in the freeze response, turn towards ourselves, of getting absorbed in anxiety, right? I am anxious, I am sad, or I am depressed, rather than mindfully, I might say, oh, look, sadness or anxiety, or this is what's showing up in my body or in my emotions. So we still can stay connected with it, but we're already beginning that compassionate relationship. The flight response turned inward is self-isolation or intra-isolation. We get disconnected from our body, and we tend to disconnect from other people because everyone else in the world, we believe in our mind, the story that we're telling ourselves is that everyone else in the world is somehow happier than we are, and that our suffering isn't as much as someone else. So we engage in this kind of comparison mind that only seeks to separate us from other people. So common humanity is meant to help support us in practice in the mind to reconnect and recognize that suffering is a part of the universal experience. Our humanity, part of what we experience is suffering, and we can recognize and not feel so alone because other people experience what we're experiencing. The fight response turned inward is this self-criticism and self-judgment. And so that's really a challenging aspect of our experience. So that gentle vocalizations that we're going to be talking about today help us to engage in a purposeful way in self-kindness. And so all of this is based on the research of Paul Gilbert out of Great Britain, and then Stellar and Keltner out of University of California, Berkeley. So, and we'll talk a little bit more, again, we'll tie more information into this next session. The benefits of self-compassion, again, emotional, relational, and then biological. And we went over that in a little more detail last session. So in getting into some of our practices, what I want to explore is some of the initial research around these gentle vocalizations, or even being able to label emotions. So in this research through University of California, I believe Cresswell, I'm going to misquote that, but I'll make sure that that's updated on the slide. So Cresswell and his team of researchers, they took 30 participants, and they were shown images of people in various stages of emotional upset. So in the experimental group, they had this group naming the emotions, just simple, oh, this is angry, this is sad, this is afraid, all of that, right? And then in the control group, they had them basically naming the corresponding gender to the person that they saw, even though there was the emotion state being presented, just of something like, this is Harry and this is Sally, just naming their gender essentially. So you'll remember what I said earlier is that we have, right, we're practicing a particular intention, a way of being aware of suffering, the suffering that is non-negotiable, the pain of life, and then the pain of how we relate in the experience of getting, feeling angry, feeling sad, feeling anxious, right? And that we can practice being aware of how we're being aware and be intentional with it, right? So we can practice being loving and gentle. So you remember when I pretended to be disinterested? It's good to be here. Right, so I want you to notice as I pretended to do that, how it felt in your body. Did you notice a little shift in even me pretending to be disinterested? It's kind of like when you watch a movie and people are in particular emotion states of like fear or anger, or like, right, like I pretended to be fearful, wide-eyed. I'm really afraid right now, right? So I want you to notice how that felt in your body as I was just pretending to do that, right? It's contagious. It's very contagious. So when we experience other people or ourselves, that emotion state tends to build on itself. And so what Cresswell and his team found is that when people experience these images, the images presented to them are contagious and people feel a certain way in their body. You get these increases in stress hormones, in self-reported stress level, as well as heart rate increase, blood pressure increase, all of these things. What happened in the experiment was in the experimental group of naming the emotions, of saying, oh, that person's angry, or that person's feeling sad or afraid or anxious, that there was decrease, actual decrease in the hotspot in the under the functional MRI. They look at the parts of the brain that are lit up, kind of like the default mode network, the mind wandering slide that I shared with you. They can see what parts of the brain get really active. In the experimental group that named the emotion, there were these decreases in amygdala activity, and that is the alarm system within the brain. There was also an increase in prefrontal cortex activity. So the frontal cortex activity, where we engage awareness, becomes stronger, and it helps to tame the emotion, okay? So there's nothing magical about this. We're not trying to control anything. We're just learning how to be with the emotion by just saying, oh, I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling anxious. And so in the research over and over again, that shows that decrease in reactivity in the body and in the brain around just naming the emotions. And if we can use a gentle vocalization around the practice, then that also helps us additionally to connect with this part of our experience where when we're born into the world, right, we come into the world very weak. We can't feed ourselves. Remember, we talked about this in one of the earlier sessions. So one of the things that we do is we coo and make these really lovey sounds to infants when we're holding them, especially when they're crying, right? Oh, I'm so sad that you feel sad. Oh, poor baby, right? We make these gentle vocalizations. And that's actually, among researchers who study this behavior as the human species, that compassion is what allows us to survive. Otherwise, we would not be able to feed ourselves. We'd be emotionally distressed all the time as infants. We wouldn't be able to walk to get away from predators. So part of the evolution of humanity is that we had to have, it was required. We had to have compassion in order to survive, right? So this gentle vocalization is a part of that, getting that response going in the body and kind of taming the emotions and the impact on stress hormones in the body. So we're going to do a practice now, very informal, and it can be just as simple as naming the emotions. So I don't want you to get too caught up in the structure of this process. So the first thing is just noticing a difficulty in the last week, which shouldn't be hard, in which you felt somewhat anxious or stressed. Okay. So just calling that to memory. And then begin by taking a deep, slow inhalation. And then on the out breath, saying, my body is telling me I'm anxious. Or my body's telling me I'm stressed. And then on the inhalation, and now I'm having thoughts that are unpleasant, right? So default mode network has become active in wanting to solve that problem, that thing that you were just thinking about. And then as you're ready, taking another deep, slow inhalation. It's okay if your timing is off, mine is too. And now on the exhale, just naming the emotion. Anxious, anxious, anxious. Just naming on the inhalation, anxious, anxious, anxious. And if you wish, placing the hand over the heart. And then on the exhale, beginning to bring awareness to softening the body. So that's just letting go of tension. Sometimes I'll actually just go like this, kind of shake my arms, if you are able to do that. And on each exhale, just softening the body, letting go of tension. You're noticing that I'm purposefully doing this and making mistakes in a purposeful way, not keeping any kind of particular time, because I want you to let go of that. It's going to happen. Your breath, some people take deeper breaths at different times and they're able to follow it really slowly and do it. And then they kind of get tense in their body around that. So just let go of all that. Just do what you can. So on each exhalation, just softening the body. Letting go of tension. And then on the next slow inhale, perhaps naming the underlying emotion. So maybe under anger or anxiety or stress, maybe we're actually feeling sad or hurt in some way. So just begin taking a deep, slow inhalation and naming the emotion. Sad, sad, sad. And again, you can do this out loud, or you can just do it in the mind. Right? Often when I practice silently, I'm just on the inhalation. Sad, sad, sad. And then again, slow exhale, softening the body. All right, and now just noticing how the body feels. All right. So with the naming practice, actually, I think I can go back to that real quick. So at the top of the slide, you can see there I'm naming a few teams who have studied this in the body as to what happens when we name emotions. Creswell, Lieberman has done 2 different studies. Creswell has done 1. And what the neuroscience researchers say about this practice is they say that if you can name it, if you can name the emotion, you can tame it. And so even just the simple slow inhalation of saying anxious, anxious, anxious. So you can even let go of this specific practice. The main thing is noticing, naming the emotion, and that your mind is coming up with thoughts, and then just continuing to name the emotion slowly, gently, and then softening in the body. So if you can name it, you can tame it in the body. So our body generally is going to slow down if we're able to recognize that we're feeling something. Okay. So as an example, when I first came across these practices in self-compassion, and I was a little bit late to the game in kind of like around 2014, maybe 2013. Anyway, time flies. One of the things that I would do, even when I was at work, is I would place my hand over my heart, because that physical touch makes a big difference in allowing us to purposefully relate to ourselves in a warm, gentle way. And then I would walk around if someone had irritated me, and I would say, oh, irritated. And I would even incorporate that sound, right? You heard me right at the beginning, oh, irritated. And even doing it internally, your mind is going to process it and send those signals into the body the same as though you were saying it out loud. Okay. So it doesn't have to be this big formal thing. It just means naming the emotions when they show up. Okay. And that's a basic practice that I use personally all the time. And with my clients and students, when I see them, I'll check in with people. What is the main emotion that you're noticing today? Connect with the body, and then just internally name that emotion. And then we talk about the emotion and then what it feels like in the body. All right. So just noticing, what did you notice during the practice? Just checking in with yourself. How do you feel in the body right now? My body is warming up quite a bit, and I can tell that the air in the room where I'm at, actually had the door open earlier to outside. It's actually really cool and cold, but my body's really heating up right now. And then what are you noticing in the body or emotions? Am I still feeling that stress or anxiety? Or am I feeling maybe a sense of peace, gentleness? Or perhaps it was hard to name that emotion right now and you're feeling a little bit more anxious. So sometimes, right, remember that backdraft that we were talking about when we start opening up to our emotions from being shut down. Sometimes that might feel really big for a little bit. Okay, so that's normal. It just means that with practice over time, you'll learn how to be with that anxiety, to be with the stress, to be with your experience with that gentle voice saying, oh, I'm feeling sad, right? And you can notice that if you and I were best friends, right, and I were to see you in an experience of stress or anxiety, if I were to see you in that state, I would walk up and be like, oh, are you stressed or anxious? Can I just be with you? Right? So we're learning how to be with ourselves as though we were a good friend. Okay. So just noticing then in that third question, is anything shifted or changed for me? Am I noticing anything different? Even if the emotion part is maybe I'm not getting very well. Am I feeling disconnected? Am I feeling neutral? Am I feeling happy? Or am I still feeling that suffering that has been a part of my life for a long time? So just allowing yourself to continue relating to that if that's happening with a gentle touch or that gentle vocalization. All right. So this is a practice that I developed actually with a number of my clients. In the Buddhist psychology, in the practices of compassion, One of the starter practices are what we call loving kindness. So it's more in this kind of tradition that we're doing this. It's been researched to show gray matter density shifts and changes in the brain, greater habit of relating to self in a gentle, kind way, improving relationships with others and creating community, and shifts in emotion states. So improving pleasant emotion states and decreasing unpleasant emotion states. So by being with unpleasant emotion states, there's still this capacity to, by letting go of the outcome, to come into a state of happiness or contentment or even neutrality if we've been feeling badly. And that happens again with practice, learning how to be again in relationship. So the traditional compassion practice in the Buddhist psychology is may I be free from and may I find. I found in clients and students that I was working with that it was difficult through that kind of practice to let go of the idea that I have to make things be different, that I'm trying to make myself be free from suffering and to then be with some other experience that might be helpful to me. But I was having a hard time, and clients and students were having a hard time connecting the practice with the underlying message of the neuroscience and the Buddhist psychological kind of tradition and history of learning how to be with whatever shows up in the moment. So we played around with the language, and together we came up with learning how to be with difficult emotions with the intention of whatever it is that we need. So, right, remember the compassion practice, the definition of compassion: mindfulness, common humanity, and kindness, that we're using primarily the first and third components to say, may I be with, so we're naming the emotion, may I be with anxiety, insecurity, or fear, or sadness, with the intention of, and then that kind response, peace, or wholeness, or courage, or kindness. And so as we do this practice, you can come up with whatever you feel you want to focus on and the antidote to that, okay? So just coming into awareness of the body, seated just as you are, allowing the eyes to soften or close, and then begin by coming into the breath. And again, you can practice allowing the body to soften. So the goal here is not to relax. It's just to let go of any tension in the shoulders, or if your jaw is clenched, just letting go of that. Now expanding awareness into the whole body breathing, just allowing the breath to move into its own natural rhythm. And then creating an image in the mind's eye of yourself, perhaps in a state of stress or difficulty or even pain. And recognizing, as you see yourself in the mind, this vivid image, just recognizing how much you wish to be with suffering in a way that would help alleviate your suffering a little bit. That intention of kindness, just like every other being on the earth. We're all in this together. And as you continue to follow the breath, begin repeating after me internally. May I be with anxiety with the intention of peace. May I be with insecurity with the intention of wholeness. May I be with fear with the intention of courage. Or may I be with fear with the intention of love. Or may I be with fear with the intention of warmth. May I be with sadness with the intention of kindness. May I be with self-judgment with the intention of understanding. Or may I be with self-judgment with the intention of forgiveness. And connecting with the breath once again. And now, if you wish, coming into the mind in awareness of someone who you love very dearly, who may be suffering in some way. Someone who brings that sense of tenderness to the heart. Just recognizing how much this being wishes to relate to their suffering in a way that would alleviate their suffering in any way. That just like you, each and every being on the earth has this wish to alleviate suffering. And then sending these well wishes to this being. You can imagine in the mind's eye speaking to them, or perhaps sending a prayer, if that's a part of your tradition, or a sense of sending a warm light, like a beam of light, of warm light from your heart to their heart. Just repeating after me. May you be with anxiety, with the intention of peace. May you be with insecurity, with the intention of wholeness. May you be with fear, with the intention of courage. May you be with sadness, with the intention of kindness. May you be with fear, with the intention of love. May you be with self-judgment, with the intention of understanding. May you be with self-judgment, with the intention of forgiveness. And now expanding awareness into the whole body breathing. Just noticing how the body feels in this moment. And now perhaps imagining the whole world in the mind. Just noticing the suffering in the world right now. Your own suffering, suffering of those harmed by the pandemic, those suffering financially, those who were suffering before all of this happened. And just recognizing your humanity connected with their humanity, that we all live here, Earth, all connected in our common humanity with suffering to one degree or another, and that just like you, each and every being on the earth wishes to be happy and free from suffering, to alleviate that suffering. So in your mind's eye, just allowing beings to come to mind that you've seen across the whole world, or holding an image of the earth in the mind. And then sending these well wishes into all the directions of the earth, like light emanating in all directions from the mind or from the heart. You can make this a prayer too, if that's a part of your tradition. May all beings be with anxiety, with the intention of peace. May all beings be with insecurity, with the intention of wholeness. May all beings be with fear, with the intention of courage. May all beings be with fear, with the intention of love. May all beings be with sadness, with the intention of kindness. May all beings be with self-judgment, with the intention of understanding. May all beings be with self-judgment, with the intention of forgiveness. And now expanding awareness into the whole body breathing. Just noticing how the body feels in this moment. Allowing yourself to feel the way that you're feeling, to be just as you are, with no need to make it any different. Just being as you are. Then slowly, gently as you're ready, allowing the eyes to open once again. And so now, just becoming aware of what you noticed during the practice, just seeing if you can name that for yourself. What stood out to you? Was the mind busy and wandering, thinking about different people, thinking about the concept of suffering, or maybe the list of things that you need to get done or other things that you're worried about? All of this shows up during practice. It's what the mind does. Doesn't mean that we choose it all the time, but it means that we can connect with the practice, right? And notice what it feels like to send these kinds of messages to ourselves, perhaps a little bit different than the usual automatic mind chatter that goes on, the stories that we're telling ourselves that are problematic, or the judgments we have against ourselves. So just noticing, how do I feel in this moment? What am I noticing in the body around my emotions? Was it easy or difficult to make contact if you chose to do that? Did it come to mind? Am I judging myself for not doing that? So just noticing everything that you can, just slowly, gently. It's all a part of the human experience. Just noticing, has anything shifted or changed? So as always, practices like these are available through Kristen Neff's website at www.self-compassion.org, and Chris Germer at chrisgermer.com. The UCSD Center for Mindfulness has mindfulness-based stress reduction, as well as mindful self-compassion meditations and practices. So you can Google some of the other information for their MBSR program, which is another form of practice, in particular mindfulness meditations, or through centerformsc.org. All of these guided meditations that they provide on their websites are free and free to download to smartphones, to your computer, or just listening right online. And then I have a couple of practices on my website, or you can always come back and view this particular webinar. So my website is emfm.space. So thank you so much for joining us today for Mindful Compassion Hour. All of the webinars are available. They're made free by just signing up, and they're archived at the website at www.nwpf.org. This series will all be archived, as well as the previous two series that I've done for the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation. One ran for about a year and a half, and then we did a short 6-week series about a year ago. And so this one will be a part of that as well. So you're always able to access those. Okay. So thank you so much. May you be free from inner and outer harm. May you be happy, peaceful, and free. May you be kind, loving, and forgiving toward your imperfections and the imperfections of others. May you be as healthy as possible and live with ease. And may you be free from suffering and experience joy wherever it may be found.